Good evening. Welcome to the second in a series of political debates from here to Holyrood. Tonight we're in Perth High School with voters keen to find out what difference these four politicians and their policies could make to life in Scotland. With 2 weeks to go before the vote, the campaigns are by turns serious and silly. The Tory leader played pool, the Liberal Democrat leader went behind bars, Mo Mowlam played bingo in Maryhill, and the SNP bagged a supermodel. Our audience, including representatives of the minor parties, have come armed with questions for the panel, who are Rosanna Cunningham, an advocate to trade who's been active in the SNP for 20 years and is currently the SNP MP for Perth. In fact, she grew up in Perth, in Western Australia, that is. Mary Scanlon has a long track record in Conservative politics in Scotland. She's a college lecturer whose pitch in the election is to fight Central Belt and male domination in equal measure. Ross Finney is an accountant and former banker. He served as a Liberal Democrat councillor in Greenock for over 20 years and admits he was in charge of their election campaign in 1997. Wendy Alexander is a management consultant and a former research officer for the Labour Party. She was special advisor to the Secretary of State and allegedly the brains behind the bill establishing the Scottish Parliament. And now we can take our first question, and it comes from the school pupil, Laura Lee. Your question, please.
Thank you. League tables reward schools with good exam results. They are very discouraging to teachers in deprived schools where success is not always so easily measurable. What policy do the candidates propose to ensure that the best teachers are rewarded and remain in their posts in deprived school areas?
Thank you very much, Laura. Wendy Alexander.
Well, I think the key thing that we must do is have a twin-track promotion structure that lets, exactly as you suggest, the best teachers stay in the classroom and be rewarded for staying in the classroom. And there are some of the proposals that I think the Scottish Parliament will be debating in its first couple of years in operation.
And what about league tables? Do you support league tables or not?
I think where you can do a like-for-like comparison, that's important. There's no point in comparing a school in a very prosperous area with one in a deprived community, and I think what's important is to have a like-for-like comparison between schools as a way of helping to raise standards.
That's what happens to a certain extent. Do you actually support the whole notion of league tables? What Laura Lee's saying is that what happens is that league tables reward schools with good exam results. Now, parents want to know what's going on. Do you support league tables?
Well, we've said that league tables should be published on the basis of like-for-like comparisons so that you don't discriminate against schools in particular areas, and as long as it compares like-for-like, I do think they have a place in driving up standards.
So poor school with poor school? I mean, does that not just reinforce poor schools?
Not if you're embarking on the whole new community school programme that we are suggesting that actually puts extra resources into areas of educational disadvantage.
Rosanna Cunningham.
I oppose league tables flat out. I don't think they're at all helpful because they really don't take into account the kinds of differences that can arise, particularly in terms of catchment areas. I think they're also profoundly demoralising, and we need to remember that they're demoralising for 2 or 3 different sets of people. They're demoralising for the students themselves, they're demoralising for the teachers, and they're demoralising for the parents of the children at those schools. So they do very little to actually make things better, and I think they do a great deal more to make things worse. What is actually needed in schools in Scotland is rewarding improvement. When schools actually do better, not so much against other schools, but when they are actually able to do better in themselves, we should reward that rather than the kind of policy that I believe is being brought into England, which would effectively make schools that are already well off better off and mean that poor schools just simply sink. I think we are in a real danger of losing the kind of comprehensiveness that Scotland has been widely known for.
Rosanna Cunningham, it's all very well to say that, you know, if schools are in a sense good improving schools, then we should talk about them, but parents surely have a right to know what's going on in their schools, and in fact league tables have actually been quite popular with parents because they have a measure of how their school's going on,
but
however crude it is.
They are profoundly misleading, and I don't think they actually tell parents really what is going on, because what is needed is schools to improve. Teachers need to know, parents need to know that the teachers are doing their best to improve the standards in the schools that their children are in, because not everybody can move to the so-called good schools. And I think that the demoralisation that is involved in the crude comparisons that we get is profoundly unhelpful.
Well, let's have some views from the audience on that then. Yes, the lady with the white collar. Yes, your question, please.
Surely it's encouraging rather than discouraging. And if your school improves, that must be tremendous encouragement. So I think they're a great thing.
Any more views on that from this side of the yes? The gentleman up in the back row, please, with the blue shirt. Yes, your question, please.
Well, I think it's incorrect. I think this smacks of Big Brother knows best. I think the consumer should have all the information to hand. And I think you could almost apply the same argument that Roseanne was using there to hospitals, for example. Surgeons' records shouldn't be known to patients because it's very demoralising for the bad surgeons' patients.
Well, thank you very much. Mary Scanlon, this was a Conservative policy brought in which has had the accusation levelled at it that it was a crude policy.
Well, there are many accusations, but you know, in reality, you know, as a mother of 2 grown-up children and as a lecturer in higher education for 25 years, I think parents should have all the information and they should make the choice. Your child gets educated once. It's one of the most important things a parent does is to ensure that their child gets the opportunity and the chance in life that they deserve. And so I was able to make that choice on the basis of the information I had. But what really upsets me is in further and higher education, I see mature students coming back 30, 40 or whatever. They've been brought up in a poor area, what we might call a deprived school, been made to feel worthless, coming back into further and higher education, gaining some self-esteem, dignity and confidence in themselves. And I don't like this labelling. If you live in a poor area with bad results, then you're doomed. It's not true. Regardless of the family background, we can all rise to it. And league tables simply point out development needs within schools.
Well, the league tables not absolutely point to what in England are called sink schools. And the problem is a lot of people don't have the choice to get out.
Well, what the league tables do point out is how well that school is performing or where they need to improve. And so there has to be a common standard in order to invest and to improve, to give the teachers more training or whatever.
There are standards, and I think that the danger of league tables is that we then become, they are the thing. We all focus in on how we're going to get onto this league table. It's a bit like trying to pass a brick exam. And I think that the thing we've got away from is in fact investing in the teachers. We seem to
do you believe in these super teachers that get paid 30 plus to stay in the classroom?
No, that was not the point I wanted to make. What I do want though is to have a profession of teachers who used to and indeed are still capable of continuous assessment. That is what the teacher is there to do. I mean, we have curricula standards set within the Scottish. Within primary schools we have the 5 to 14. It sets very clear targets and objectives as to what teachers should be achieving.
So pressing on this point of penny and tax, because the tax issue has been an issue in this campaign, and the Liberal Democrats always made it clear they would have penny and tax for education. When you look at the Scottish education system, don't you think it's time that you return to that policy and said unequivocally to the voters, that's what we'll put forward in the Scottish Parliament?
No, Kirsty, you're now trying to twist the argument. The argument, no, you are. With all due respect, we have said exactly what we need and are looking for. But what I do not know, and indeed unless you're able to tell me, I mean, if we take some of the things that are being done at the moment by the current Labour government, where a circular a day is hitting every school. Now, that's terrific, but from my point of view and a Liberal Democrat point of view, that is not how I would direct the resources of the Scottish Office to tackling the problems in schools. So there are two things that I want to do. First of all, no, you've asked me why I can't give an unequivocal answer, and I'm going to answer that point. First of all, we want to look at where the resource is actually being put. We want to look as to whether people of Scotland are getting value from the money that is currently being invested. And secondly, there will be no change in the tax structure anyway until a year from now almost, and by that time we will have had a budget statement in November. Now, if we find that in the Scottish Office there is enough resource that can be moved or better used, we'll use it. Right. But if we can't find it, then we're being open and honest and saying to you, we will put up a penny in tax.
Wendy Alexander, we are in this position because you hog-tied yourself to Tory spending plans in your run-up to the 1997 election, and so Scottish education has had less spent on it in the last 2 years than in the closing years of the Conservative government. That's dreadful, isn't it?
We're no longer in that position.
But you were there for 2 years, 2 years where schools didn't have the teachers, 2 years where school buildings didn't have investment. That's 2 years. 2 long years for pupils who could be between primary 6, primary 7 and first year. I mean, that's dreadful.
When we came in, we said that we had to deal with the debt we inherited. We made that promise in advance of the election, and we said we would stick to the plans we inherited for 2 years. Actually, we did more than that. We put 127 million extra into Scottish education and 116 million into buildings. But that is as nothing as to the amount of money that started being pumped into Scottish education last week. It is £1,300 million extra. Now, these are figures. Let me make it real for people. This week, the authoritative report by the Fraser Vander Institute said the biggest single increase in Scottish Office money is a 20% increase over the next 3 years on the spending in Scottish education.
That is what you're saying now, and of course there is a white paper, and it's going to be the first bill that comes before a Scottish Parliament is going to be on education. But surely you must regret these 2 years, which for children at school are a long 2 years when they did not get the education that they should have got.
We did put in 127 million extra, and we did the very area that Ross, and I think probably everybody recognises, was actually the early intervention programme. That was the first priority.
Rosanna Cunningham.
Well, I mean, what Wendy is trying to avoid admitting is that on top of the swinging Tory cuts, which were in existence, and I don't remember Labour congratulating Michael Forsyth for his generosity in the last years when he was Secretary of State, they then added more cuts of their own, because the truth of the matter is that across the board, in terms of Labour spending, the first 3 years spending plans for Labour, £1.1 billion less than under the Tories. So it's not even the same low level as the Tories, it is actually less. And when Wendy talks about extra money, she means adding back a bit of the cuts that are made, not real extra money.
Let me put that back
and
to
we
Wendy
are
Alexander.
talking about real extra money.
Wendy
and all
Alexander.
we are asking you to pay for that is 1 penny.
Wendy Alexander.
Rosanna, it is simply not true to say that we're only adding back Tory cuts. As of next year,
And
we
Labour
will
cuts.
be spending more money than has ever been spent on Scottish education, and it's validated by a range of outside economic commentators.
Can I go out?
Years and years
I must
and
go out to the
years
audience. I must go out to the audience now.
I think it's a bit hypocritical of Wendy in relation to education, because within weeks of being elected, you would introduce tuition fees, you'd abolish the student grant, you'd driven tens of thousands of working class, primarily young people, out of education, where they have no opportunity to be educated in the way that you've talked about. I think it's indefensible. I think the people of Scotland do not trust New Labour as far as education is concerned. We think the first bill that should be introduced into the Scottish Parliament is the abolition of tuition fees and the return of the maintenance grant. That's what we want to see happen.
Right, well, thank you. Answer very briefly, Wendy, because I want to go straight to Mary Scanlon.
Let me deal with exactly the point you've made in tuition fees. You know, when I went to university, and I was lucky enough to go, less than 1 in 10 people went. 1 in 2 people, is what we want to have go in the future. When I went to university, huge numbers of people never had that chance because the places weren't there. What this government is promising, that in Scotland, under a Scottish Parliament, 1 in 2 people who leave school in Scotland will have the place in higher education to go into. And we've done that by making sure that 4 out of 10 of the poorest pay nothing. So the important thing is that 1 in 2 Scots get the chance that I did have and more deserve to have. That's the crux of the debate. And 4 out of 10 pay nothing.
Mary Scanlon, answer this.
As a Scottish Conservative, I would fully support the Socialist Workers' Party. We are actually, and we've met before on public platforms, we are at one on this. And the first bill we would be putting into the Scottish Parliament, as you know, is to abolish tuition fees. It's all very well Wendy saying that, the numbers in higher education. I am in higher education. I've seen single parents coming into higher education in the past year. I've seen people working so hard in supermarkets that they can't do their essays, they can't do their coursework. And the dropout rate in higher education is absolutely phenomenal. The intake was down 6%, but the dropout rate is horrific.
So wait a minute, Mary, can I just, presumably a Conservative-dominated Scottish Parliament would put a lot of, you're raising your eyebrows, but it could happen.
Yeah, but not this time.
A Conservative-dominated Scottish
Next
Parliament.
time.
So presumably then you would be pumping money back into higher education, would you? Because it wasn't...
Well, the fact is that the Conservatives doubled the numbers in higher education. In fact, it was recommended to Mrs Thatcher in 1985, when Keith Joseph was Secretary of State, to impose tuition fees. And Mrs Thatcher believed in free education, opportunity for all, regardless of their background.
Well,
further and higher.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to...
Further.
I think we can hold that one there. I think that's going to be a dominant issue throughout this whole campaign. And we can move on now to a question from Brian Adams, who's a community councillor. Your question, please.
Thank you, Kirsty. Does the panel think that Holyrood is the first step to the breakup of the Union, and can Scotland stand on its own?
Rosanna Cunningham.
Yes and yes, I suppose. It's been a simple answer. It will only be if the people of Scotland want it to be. I think that's something that really needs to be emphasised and re-emphasised. Ultimately, a decision about the future of Scotland lies with the people of Scotland, which is why we've said we would like that question to be put in a referendum. I think that's really the only fair way to do it.
On your list of pledges, Scottish independence comes kind of way down.
Kirsty, I'm not going to get into that nonsensical argument. The SNP stands for independence. The SNP stands for independence, always has done, and we continue to argue for independence. What we're saying to the people of Scotland, if you do vote SNP, we go into that administration in Holyrood, then what we will be prepared to do is offer you an option, because we're giving you the referendum, giving you the chance to say yes or no. Nobody has ever given you that option before. Straight question, yes or no. So I think yes, it is something that we want to go on for. It's how we see the devolved parliament developing, and yes, an independent Scotland would be healthier and wealthier than it currently is today. Is it inevitable? It's inevitable if the people of Scotland want it to be so.
Mary Scanlon, you used to believe that would eventually happen. I think you might have even used the words that the Labour and the Liberal Democrats were the midwives of independence. Do you still believe that to be the case?
Well, I hadn't heard the word midwives, but we certainly did see a Scottish Parliament as a stepping stone to the breakup of the United Kingdom. And the stance that we are taking is we want this Parliament to work. And I think the people of Scotland want it to work. And they do not want to come home every night and see a constant ding-dong between a Labour-dominated Parliament and an SNP, let's break up the Union. And I think we owe it, well, those of us who are fortunate enough to get into the Scottish Parliament, we owe it to the Scottish people to make this work within the framework of a united kingdom.
So you've changed your mind about it. You don't inevitably think it's going to lead it to independence?
Well, I think that if there are people like the Conservatives within it who are committed to the union of the United Kingdom, we will work...
Yes. Is that yes?
Well, we'll work to make it a success and a stable Parliament within a united kingdom.
William Hague said today that he thought that you would work with Labour in order to make sure the SNP didn't have their way in a Parliament. Is that the case?
Yes, we would support the Labour and the Liberal Party if it came to a vote on breaking up the union of the United Kingdom. We would also vote with the SNP and the Liberals against Labour on tuition fees. We will vote on an issue-by-issue basis. That gives us flexibility and it gives us a degree of independence. Unlike Ross's party, if you vote Liberal, Jim Wallace decides if that's an SNP or a Labour vote. I think that's an insult to democracy.
We're going to stay with the panel.
You have absolutely no evidence.
We're going to come back to the panel in a second. I want to get more views from the audience. There's lots of hands up. Yes, the young woman with the white shirt on, please, and then the gentleman over on the left.
I think that Scotland could go it alone. But the other parties in Scotland have been scaremongering for so long that people are starting not to believe in themselves.
Right. The gentleman with the blue jacket on, yes? Yes.
Thank you, Kirsty. Could I just wish all the panel a happy St. George's Day?
Good, thank you.
Why use such emotive words like breakup and divorce? We're actually talking about a 21st century restructuring, and no one's talking about social independence and breaking up relationships.
Right, gentleman at the back with the blue jumper on, please.
I think the issue really is here about what kind of Scotland do we want and what kind of an independent Scotland do we want. I'm from the Scottish Socialist Party and we believe in independence, but it has to be an independent socialist Scotland. There's no point in having changing the flag over Edinburgh Castle from the Union Jack to the Saltire if all that happens is economic power is still left in the hands of big business. It has to be held by the ordinary working class people in this country, and we don't want to break any links with ordinary working class people in England or Wales, Ireland or across Europe.
Thank you. And the woman there with the blue jacket on, yes please.
Yeah, I'd like to know when Rosanna's actually going to tell us the cost of independence, and I'd like to know who she thinks is going to end up paying the bill. It won't be Sean Connery, it'll be the working people of Scotland.
Right, and the young man at the back, yes.
Thanks, Kirsty. It was just a question about what Rosanna said about being, a healthier and a wealthier Scotland and independence. And I want to ask just one question. It's just from a poster that I've seen, and it may be a propaganda poster, I don't know, but an independent Scotland, will that need embassies through the world? And if it does need embassies, then how are you going to pay for that? And how is that going to make us wealthier if we have to pay for 104 new embassies?
Thank you very much. Well, on the very narrow point of that, before we carry on, what about that?
What about embassies? Well, I mean, any independent state is going to have embassies in countries in the world, and I don't expect Scotland is likely to be any different. I can't imagine anybody would. You'll pay for it the same way other independent states pay for their foreign service as well. I find this an utterly sterile argument. Scotland currently it has an economy which would place it something like 7th on the list of wealthy nations in the world. And frankly, to pretend that an independent Scotland is somehow going to turn into a poor relation of anybody is to betray precisely the lack of confidence, I think, which was mentioned by one of our younger members of this audience. And I'm pleased that the younger members of Scotland, the young people of Scotland, appear not to lack that confidence, which is a confidence in the future and in themselves, frankly.
Wendy Alexander, you're being accused of talking Scotland down and being negative about Scotland. Can Scotland stand in its own, in reality?
Sure, it can make the choice to go its own way. I just think it's the wrong choice. I'm confident about Scotland's future, but I don't want the money that should be going in Scottish nursery schools being diverted into the Scottish Navy. I don't want the money that should be going into our clinics diverted into Trident.
Well, presumably we pay towards the British Navy as it is, and presumably under devolution we'll still pay for the British Navy. So how is it going to make any difference?
As we've said all through this campaign, the choice is divorce is an expensive business. If you set up two separate households, then it costs a lot. We have to have a separate social security system, separate army, separate navy. And we're just saying to the SNP, by all means, advocate divorce, but tell us
you're talking
how
about
much
negative
it's
language.
going to cost.
This is a very...
Why? I mean, I think what particularly the young people were talking about up there, and particularly the young woman in the white shirt was talking about, this negative language about Scotland, that you say there's confidence gone, but only up to a point. And that rather than talking up Scotland all the time, there's a oh but.
No, we are talking up Scotland. Look at yesterday. I was part of a launch of saying Scotland can be one of the nations leading the computer revolution in the world, for example. That's where our future lies in the 21st century.
This seems to me a very old and very sterile argument. I mean, the globe is now so small. I will always be a Scot. I suspect the people in this audience will always be Scots. And it's more about your culture, it's more about how we perceive things, it's more about our attitude. We don't actually need, indeed, what is now in this world, global is economic independence. Who actually can seriously control their independence in an economic sense? So what we're interested in as Scottish Liberal Democrats is a structure here, and to answer that gentleman's question, we are very confident that this Parliament can work, that the people of Scotland can take responsibility for the affairs that have been given to that Parliament, and that we can continue to have relationships with the United Kingdom. We will enhance our relationships with Europe, and we will look outwards.
Right, so how does that different? I want to put to you what Mary Scanlon was saying about how now
continue to have relations with independent government.
You don't need all the bureaucracy, you don't need to set it up. We already have quite sufficient institutions in Scotland that will look after us being Scots.
Right, Ross Finney, Mary Scanlon has made it very clear, crystal clear, who the Conservatives would vote with on certain policies, and accuses the Liberal Democrats of not being clear what alliances you would form in a Scottish Parliament.
Well,
Will you form exactly the same alliances as Mary Scanlon's forming for exactly the same purposes, tuition fees and so forth?
Well, I certainly, now it appears, I'm rather sad that Wendy and the Labour Party can't just admit they got it wrong on tuition fees. I mean, it seems to me that
no, but I'm asking you what you would do over that.
Well, quite clearly, we've made absolutely clear we want to abolish tuition fees, and if there's a vote in the new Parliament and the Labour Party are still digging their heels in and opposing it, then they'll be beaten 3-1.
On the question of coalitions in a Scottish Parliament,
coalitions.
Will you tell us who indeed you will work to support and who will you not work to support?
If you're talking coalition, you'll have to ask that question to the other parties. No, because a coalition is not a coalition of one. I hope you've understood that. I mean, a coalition does actually require two at least.
But you and the Liberal Democrats encourage the idea of coalition. You're the ones that encourage it.
Yes, absolutely. I think consensus where you can, instead of all this rancor and bitterness. But if we're getting the people who are going to decide this election are the people of Scotland. They are going to vote and decide in whom they have confidence. And I'm in this election to ensure, along with all my fellow Liberal Democrats, that we get the maximum number of Liberal Democrats. Now, I don't know what the result is, and if you do, I hope you'll tell us, because you could...
But you could tell me now who you're prepared to do a deal with and who you wouldn't.
No, wait a minute. Look, you're not understanding coalition politics. The people who decide, the people who will decide the result are the people of Scotland. No, wait a minute. You've challenged me, and I think I'm entitled to get this point across. On the 7th of May, either a party will have an overall majority, or we will all be minorities. And in that circumstance, you then have to treat that situation you have to face up to.
Right, let's have some views from the audience. Yes, up to the back of the gentleman.
The Liberal Democratic Party have said they will not support any party that offers a referendum on independence. Therefore, I think you should drop the word democratic from your party name.
Right.
Why is that? I mean, why?
Because you'll not support any party
but that's in a case where we're all minorities. Who can possibly claim that they have got a majority to demand a referendum if everyone is a minority? I mean, what's undemocratic about that?
Wendy Alexander, just briefly and finally, George Robertson said that devolution would kill nationalism stone dead. He was completely wrong, wasn't he?
I think we've got a clarity around the debate in the last 2 weeks that George was looking for. And the clarity is this, is if Labour is elected on the 7th of May, on the first day after that election, as Ross says, you'll have a Labour government sitting down to worry about schools, jobs and hospitals. If Rosanna is in that cabinet, her first priority will be to agree the terms of divorce from the United Kingdom. And that is the essence of the difference that George was talking about.
Yeah, but could you just answer the question? Because George Robertson was so assertive when he said that. He said that devolution would kill nationalism stone dead. He was wrong, wasn't he?
Nationalism, let's wait another week and see what the results of the election is. Look at how the polls are moving.
All right, can I just hear back? Can I just hear back from Brian Adams, who asked the question, please? Can I just? What do you made of that?
I just feel it's sad sometimes that we don't get straight answers to the question, which is the first point. I don't think we need a fancy new building either for a parliament. What I do feel is, yes, we can control some affairs from Scotland and they should be controlled fairly and properly, but I also believe it is Scotland's right to have a referendum, not whether he thinks we should have one. I think it is only correct that we, the people of Scotland, decide whether there's a split or there's not a split, and it's done by a referendum.
Thank you very much. We can move on now to take a question from David Mitchell, who's a farmer. Your question, please.
Thank you, Kirsty. Agriculture and its related industries are more important economically to Scotland than they are in a UK context. With this in mind, how will the Scottish Parliament better serve the rural community than Westminster does?
Ross Finney.
Well, I think, first of all, I mean, you make a good point, and I mean, the farming community obviously is in a dreadful state at the moment. There's two issues. I think there's both the farming and there's the rural community, and I think it's important in the new Parliament, as far as Scottish Liberal Democrats are concerned, is that we actually make clear that there is a minister with responsibility for that side of it. In terms of trying to regender some confidence into the farming community, then I think we have to do everything in the Parliament's power to actually stimulate the market, particularly in the much beleaguered beef industry, who have been so taken apart by BSE. And I think we actually have to use all the levies that are currently there to actually promote the product. I think we also have to assist the agricultural community in terms of pursuing the need for food standards, and therefore using that as a quality mark in which we can promote Scottish agriculture.
Rosanna Cunningham.
I certainly hope the Scottish Parliament will do a great deal better than Westminster has performed over the last number of years in respect of farmers and the whole of the agricultural sector, and indeed the rural economy. I think the recent fuel tax rise particularly hits rural people harder than almost anywhere else, and it's going to have a devastating effect on farmers as well as all the other people that live in rural areas. But I think the issue of farmers particularly is extremely important. What many people don't realise is that the average farm income is now less than the minimum wage. And people think of farmers as all being incredibly wealthy. The truth of the matter is huge numbers are struggling hand-to-mouth existences. What the Scottish Parliament will need to do is put in place real support. Early entry, yes, but also support for people trying to get out of the farms, because so many people right now are trapped. So we need support for the individual farmers, but we also need support in pushing for increasing confidence across Europe in the product that has been particularly badly hit over the last years, and that is beef. So the first thing the Scottish Parliament ought to do is lift that ban on beef on the bone, because that will, just in one blow, make an enormous difference to that confidence.
Let's just hear, I'm going to bring that back to the panel, but let's hear from some views in the audience about the farming community. We're in the midst, right? The gentleman up at the back with his hand up, first of all, and then the gentleman over there as well. Thank you.
Am I alone in thinking that the farmers actually brought a lot of the problems that now face upon themselves?
Well, we'll find out, yes.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to make the point that I think confidence in the produce that comes out of Scottish farms is very, very important. And I'd like to ask the panel what they think about organic production, because I'm from the Scottish Green Party and we've actually got a target of 30% organic produce out of Scottish farms by 2010. And there is a demand, and I haven't seen any commitments from any of the other parties for that.
Right, another gentleman in the green suit, yes.
Yes, Kirsty, the thing that really worries me is where on earth are we going to get the people with the dedication involved in farming these days? We've got to look at the average age of farmers being 59 years old. For an income of less than £52 a week in the livestock areas, I think it's absolutely ridiculous.
Right, well, I want to just take a point from Graham Farmer from the Green Party. Your question, please. You've made a point to make.
Obviously, one of my colleagues just made a point about organic farming, which we would like to support in the future. But what we're also keen on is actually bringing local farmers together with local consumers and cutting out the supermarkets in the middle, which charge outrageous prices sometimes, and yet are giving the farmers a very poor deal. Recently, I was in Perth supporting a farmers market which did just that. I'd like to know what the panel would do through the Scottish Parliament to actually support local farmers, giving produce directly to local people.
Thank you very much. First of all, Wendy Alexander, let's pick up on the point the gentleman said at the back, that one of the biggest things that could happen in the Scottish Parliament straight away, and Rosanna Cunningham was talking about it, was lifting of the ban of beef in the bone. That would return confidence to Scottish farming.
On that one issue, the Chief Medical Officer in Scotland and also in England have separately come to the conclusion that it is not wise to do so. Now, that does seem to me circumstances where you simply have to take medical advice, particularly looking at what our experience has been of some of these health issues in Scotland in the last couple of years.
We had to deal with the Conservative government throughout BSE telling us perhaps one thing and then it would change. So why should we be any more confident in what this Labour government is doing over beef in the bone?
I think that's the very reason why we've got to listen to the experts, and if the Chief Medical Officer in Scotland is saying that it's not wise to do so, then I think it would be foolhardy for politicians to decide to reverse that. But can I come back to, and I hope this would be helpful, I mean, I agree with that one exception, I agree with everything Rosanna had to say and what's been said in the audience. There is, I mean, there is a serious crisis in Scottish farming, and it does seem to me, I mean, this is a classic area where a Scottish Parliament committee can get down at the early stages to say, one of the problems with Scottish farming is that we put in £500 million every year, and yet we still have this terrible crisis. And we've heard from the audience some of the solutions, like organic farming.
Well, no, but one thing, you say that that's going to be an early job for the Scottish Parliament. In what way would you in the Scottish Parliament produce a policy that was different from the UK government at Westminster? One particular thing which would help farmers in rural Scotland.
One of the very obvious ways that we've heard about from the audience would be to see a Scottish version of the Soil Association that looked at how we built in Scottish produce and marketed that internationally through Scottish Trade International. There are real opportunities in organic farming in Scotland, which the Parliament should be looking at.
Well, what are we saying here, Mary Scanlon? Because there'll be cut back in subsidies, but it seems to be that looking at your manifesto that you do want subsidies for farmers in upland farmers particularly.
The farmers need our support, and we're proposing a very powerful agricultural committee, because I think that MSPs have to work far more closely with farmers. But the one point that this government is not supporting farmers, if you take the recent charges that abattoirs have to pay for specified risk materials, every other government in Europe pays for this. Now, if an abattoir has to pay, then the farmer has to pay. That is an example of additional costs on Scottish farmers that farmers in the rest of Europe do not face. And I think that we're not looking for special treatment here. We're simply looking to market this excellent product, and we're looking for the support from the government that other farmers throughout the rest of Europe have.
Well, I mean, you've given now, obviously, the candidates some ideas for policy, so let's hear a couple more. Gentleman in the second row.
Yes, well, I would just like to support what Wendy Alexander said about listening to the scientists. We know that the Tory government consistently failed to listen to their own scientific advisors from 1986 on. We know that the worst years for human infection in BSE were 1988 on. If they'd listened to their own scientists, we would not have had the crisis, and farmers would not be in the slough of despond they are today.
Okay, gentlemen, I must pick up some more views from the audience. Gentleman with the white shirt, and then the gentleman at the back there, yeah.
The whole business of the beef in the bone actually smacks a bit of in the nanny state. Wouldn't it be simpler to let people tell people the facts and then let them decide whether they're actually going to buy beef in the bone or not? After all, we allow people to buy cigarettes with a warning on them saying this will damage your health. Beef in the bone, I understand, is a very, very slight risk. Why not let people decide for themselves?
Right. Gentleman at the back.
The gentleman down there mentioned government scientists and taking their advice. Are these the same government scientists who recommended to the rendering industry that they actually reduce the burn temperature which created the BSE problem in the first instance?
Right. Gentleman there, yes?
Perhaps the government ought to consider putting a tax on beef in the bone, and then I think the Chief Medical Officer's opinion might change rather quickly.
The gentleman raised the question. Can we have your point, please?
Perhaps I'm a bit concerned here that we've got onto the one issue of beef on the bone, and I think it's a bigger picture than this. And I'm concerned that none of the panellists have really grasped how vital a vibrant agriculture is to the rural community of Scotland.
So what would your answer be? How would you improve it? Give me one coherent sort of 30 seconds on how you would make farming better in Scotland.
Well, one of the main things we need is this ending to unilateral decisions which allow our industry to compete with other countries. We need our politicians to go out and fight for us as opposed to actually burying us in bureaucracy. Our industry is absolutely being swamped.
Right.
Can I make a point on organic farming? A farmer said to me last week, we're all being forced to go organic because we can't afford fertiliser.
Oh, that's a great idea. As long as the cost's not passed on to the consumer.
Organic, but not by choice.
Can I just, I mean, you talked about it being narrow, but I'd just like to be, isn't it ironic, though, Wendy Alexander, that here the Labour government is being accused of being the nanny state, when in fact Labour used to accuse the Tories of being the nanny state?
Well, it is an unusual allegation in this context. I think the important thing, and I think the important thing as the way to take farming forward is Tony Blair won a £270 million rebate for the Highlands and Islands as part of the European Objective 1 status last month. It is critical that that £270 million goes to support a different and sustainable future in Scotland's rural communities, and the Parliament should be at the heart of that
What are you going to do for Highland farmers out of that money?
Well, just answer. No, let Wendy answer that very briefly.
Well, we are putting in at the moment £4,000 extra for every upland hill farmer as extra support that went in for Christmas. But as Rosanna said, it's not enough. We need a different sort of future for these
the
areas,
uplift-
and
Right.
that's what the European restructuring money
Well,
is
wait.
for.
Farmers, hang on, farmers will wait. I'm afraid we have to move on. Farmers will wait to see what actually happens when the Scottish Parliament is elected. We need to take a question now from Wilma Lumsden, who's an accountant and an SNP member. Your question, please.
Thank you, Kirsty. My question is this. Is a PFI not like renting a television, whereby money is repaid over several years without ownership of the TV being transferred? And is there not a real danger that the public purse could end up financing private businesses?
Thank you very much indeed. Private finance initiatives. Mary Scanlon, you're an expert in economics and management.
Thank you, Kirsty.
How can you support a system that costs the taxpayer more money than it would be unless it was a public investment?
Yes, we were the government who introduced PFI, and it is a means of providing schools and hospitals and new roads rather than heavier borrowing. As far as I'm aware, there are as many different PFI contracts and systems. For example, the Skye Bridge will be paid back in 12 years. Other PFI contracts are quite different. So because one doesn't work well, it doesn't mean they all don't work well. But I think that PFI as an initiative has been successful. But having said that, I got a letter last week telling me various problems about the Skye Bridge, the accounting, etc. It doesn't mean that we cannot learn from the past and look at a better type of contract for the future.
Well, Wendy Alexander, surely this is just another situation where Labour has wearing Tory clothes. You have not only adopted PFIs, you've embraced PFIs.
What Labour has said is we want to build 8 new hospitals and 100 schools.
It's not 100 new
and
schools.
We are
You're being disingenuous about 100 new schools.
New or completely refurbished schools. They're not minor
How many
alterations.
brand new schools are there?
A very large number of
months ago,
now,
Wendy,
in order
and
to
are already on the
build
go.
those 8 hospitals and those 100 schools,
You're not building 100 schools, Wendy Alexander.
where it is necessary. We are happy to work in partnership with the private sector where that represents better value for money. The choice here is between delivering new schools, delivering new hospitals, or not delivering them.
No, that's
and
not
we're
the
clear
case.
that we want to
That is not
deliver.
the case.
I will very briefly take Wendy Alexander through the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. The private consortium who is running the PFI gets the old buildings to sell off at a commercial gain. They can build anything they want on the land. The hospital that's being built has fewer beds with more acute care. And after 25 years, the hospital returns to the private consortium, which means that the health authority presumably is a complete hostage to fortune, because the private consortium can charge the earth for the hospital. How we don't own it. Instead of costing the taxpayers, what I understand the figures are something like £180 million to build this hospital plus a medical school area, it's in the end going to cost £900 million. Would not it be better to raise the finance publicly, perhaps even through raising taxes, and it means it's an asset for the country?
No, Kirsty, because what you're suggesting is that Edinburgh waits another 10 or 15 years before it has its hospital. This is the critical issue. We are saying to the people of Scotland, we will build in the next 4 years more schools than you've seen since John Knox was around, and more hospitals than the Conservatives built over 20 years.
Ross Finney.
No, this really is a nonsense. I do not understand and I do not believe that that is the choice. There's going to be no disagreement in this hall or indeed throughout Scotland that what we want are more schools and we want better hospitals. But what I cannot believe for the life of man, and I think if you talk to anyone in the street, is that the public are going to pay for it for 25 years for it to be owned by the private sector is absolute nonsense. Now, Wendy, you perhaps did not quite catch Wendy's intervention because she said not always. And my question back to her is, well, if it's not always, why ever at all? Because if the private sector isn't too keen to own prisons, and if they're prepared to return the Glasgow schools, then I do not believe it's beyond the wit of man, and the Scottish Liberal Democrats certainly believe it's not beyond the wit of man, that we should embrace the private sector to provide the finance, but that after the 25 years there should be mechanisms in place where the public own those assets. You paid for them, they're yours, and that's where they should be.
Now the point is that Mary Scanlon made the point that there are as many different PFIs as there are days in the week, and that's absolutely true.
But they're going down the road where our hospitals and schools are being owned by the private sector.
But why can't you devise a system whereby you, in the end of the day, own the assets and not the private company? Why? I mean, you're an economist, you're a management consultant.
And they run the Treasury. It's Treasury rules she quotes. They run the Treasury.
As Sam Galbraith made clear this week, it is possible at the end of the 25-year contract to buy the building of the Edinburgh Royal for £6 million. But the issue is this: an empty building, as we have seen at the Healthcare International in Clydebank, is not what Scotland needs. What Scotland needs is a hospital that was a private of working doctors and nurses.
I need to get a lot of you. The hands are up all over the audience. Yes, the young woman in the russet colour, and then the gentleman with the red tie.
Kirsty, I think Wendy has a very difficult job to do, because what she has to try to persuade us is that what is being said from London has to go in Scotland. I frankly don't believe that. Wendy should come clean and admit now that PFI is a thoroughly bad deal for Scotland, and anyone who's been involved in looking at it from local government point of view knows that it would not be viable without the subsidy that comes from central government. PFI is finished, and Wendy should come off the fence and admit it.
It's not 100 new schools, Wendy Alexander. Gentleman in the black jacket.
Can Janet Law then tell us, and will Roseanne comment, if PFI is such a very, very bad deal, why Perth and Kinross Council have their first PFI as plush new council officers for themselves?
New council officers.
Yes, but Rosanna Cunningham.
Well, I'll tell you one reason why local councils do it is because they are forced to do it. They have been left no alternative by a previous Conservative government and now by the Labour government. Now, can I say...
That's presumably Wendy Alexander's argument.
No, wait a second, because Wendy Alexander is being very dishonest here tonight. Sam Galbraith, amongst many, many other Labour spokespeople, were fierce in their criticism of what they said was essentially privatisation. And indeed, the person who is currently the General Secretary of the Labour Party in Scotland described it as precisely that, and that's what we say too. Now, suddenly, overnight, at some point, they seem to have turned completely around on this issue. Having been the fiercest critics, they now are the fiercest advocates
let's talk about SNP policy.
It is yet another example. New Labour, same old story.
Well, let's talk about semantics and language. What is so different between a PFI and whatever you're having? You're calling them certain schemes. What are they called? Scottish trusts.
Trusts.
It
is an idea which has been floating about a number of the unions. It is not an idea which can be ignored.
Trust.
And at the end of the
private
day,
capital?
Yes, it's private capital, and the asset ends in public ownership, and that is the fundamental point. Because ultimately, this is about the issue of public services and whether or not they should be owned by the public or not. What the Labour Party is saying is not, and effectively they're setting up honeypot deals for a lot of the private firms. What she doesn't tell you is that the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary is going to cost £6 million more per year under this scheme than it would have done if they had done it under the old system.
Rosanna Cunningham, I need to put that straight back to Wendy Alexander. This is honeypot deals.
No, as we've just heard, all over Scotland, people who want schools and hospitals are happy to see money from the private sector. Well, let me give you an example. The SNP convener in the Highlands and Islands wanted rightly that for the first time ever, Morgan and Ardnamurchan for the last 20 years should have a secondary school. And he supported that building should be built by the private sector. No teacher is privatised, no nurse, no doctor. The building is built with private capital.
Support the Conservatives?
Because you tried to privatise.
You were totally opposed to it, and like tuition fees, you promised you'd scrap it. The minute you were in government, you adopted PFI. Why can't you be honest?
You have to bring the gentleman of the Scottish Socialist Party.
Let's call things by the real name. PFI is a privatisation of public services. It's about making a killing out of essential services like health and education, and it's a disgrace and it's a scandal. And in my opinion, what you should be doing is transferring the money that you're investing in Trident, put it into schools, put it into hospitals, put it into education. If you want a PFI scheme, use a PFI scheme to build nuclear weapons.
Right, could you give the microphone to the gentleman too long? Yes, you want to make a point.
Surely this is another scheme of politicians where they all say every year, we're going to build 300 more hospitals, 1,000 more schools. They won't be in power 20 years later to see the results of this in the long term.
Right, the young woman behind in the black jacket. Yes, you want to make that point? Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Can I just go back to the point about Wendy, about the Labour Party building 8 new hospitals? On one hand, they're doing that. On the other hand, they're taking our local facilities away from our Perth Royal Infirmary. Can she answer that question?
Right, well, that's a particular constituency question. I think what I'll have to do is move on and take a question from the gentleman in the blue tie in second row. Yes. Could you hand the microphone down, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty. Is the problem not in relation to the public sector borrowing requirement, which seems to be an obsession of the Treasury to govern all expenditure with that, including capital, and what the panel's views in taking capital out of the PBSR and commercialising it, not necessarily privatising it, and allowing these capital schemes to proceed with a mixture of public and private finance?
I'll put that over in a minute.
Would Wendy Alexander invest her own money in a mortgage to buy a house that was, say, charging double the commercial rate of interest, and at the end of 30 years the building society got to keep the house? If she wouldn't spend her own money that way, why was she spending the taxpayers' money?
There's a lot of comment in the audience on this. Let's talk about the whole question of the public sector borrowing requirement. Let's just find more money.
We've heard tonight about the fear of privatisation from people, and that's a very real fear after the last 20 years in Scotland. I mean, it is the case that the Conservatives in Stonehaven, in Stonehaven, they tried to privatise doctors and nurses. That is a real fear, deeply held. The issue here about the accountancy rules is whether in providing a building we can borrow money from the private sector and use their expertise to build a building. Because Ninewells Hospital, not so far from here, took twice as long to build, came in twice over cost. Same thing in Crosshouse. There are lots of examples round Scotland where the taxpayer got ripped off because the building wasn't built efficiently.
Let me
Here's a privatisation real.
Right, okay, Wendy Alexander, answer the gentleman's straightforward point. Sure. If you're offered a mortgage, and at the end of 25 years, the mortgage company took the house, would you think that was a good deal?
I would take a lease, which I think is what, which I think this is a leasing deal.
No, so you'd be happy with a lease?
No.
You'd be happy with
But it's nonsense. I mean, I still don't understand. I mean, if you talk about producing, there are private health companies who produce hospitals very quickly, Wendy. I mean, if Bupa want to, they go into a partnership with the private sector. But the curious thing, Wendy, is at the end of the day, Bupa own the hospital. So why am I, Joe Public, and certainly as a member of the Scottish Liberal Democrat Party, not entitled to the same deal? If I'm perfectly happy. This is a model. We don't need to use public money all the time. There is no reason why we shouldn't embrace the private sector. They have a certain degree of expertise in that. But I do not understand for the life of me why, if I in the public am going to use private finance, I can't at the end of the day be ensured that hospitals or schools, that they are going to remain in the public.
This is going to run and run. I'm afraid we're going to have to hold it there and take a question from Fraser Wilson, who is a pupil at Perth High.
Scots supermodel Kirsty Hume has urged young Scots voters to vote SNP. Which non-political figure would the panel members like to have on their side on the run-up to May the 6th?
Thank you. Ross Finney, you don't have many of these public figures supporting you.
No, I wasn't. I think the question was which. It didn't necessarily imply that I had to have them.
Or which would you like?
And if you're going to be persistent of that, I might want to employ you as well, Kirsty. I don't really mind. I mean, I think that the question of personalities, it's more the substance of what are they actually going to do. I mean, having some star telling you that they support it, it's all very interesting and all very helpful, but in the end of the day, you're going to have to vote in terms of your future and what they're going to do for you. And I rather suspect that some of the stars like the glitz, but aren't too keen on telling you actually what they want to do and what they're going to do for Scotland.
So if Ewan McGregor came to you and said, Ross Finney, I'm desperate to support the Liberal Democrats, you go, nah.
No, I mean, we're all you know, I mean, after all, you've got to remember, we did embrace John Cleese.
Yes, you did.
You know, so I mean, I could get up and do the Ministry of Funny Walks, but I'll probably avoid that.
Mary Scanlon, what famous supporter would you like to have in Scotland that was non-political?
I hadn't thought about this in advance, but the person who I admire greatly in Scotland, and I don't know what his political colours are, he's creative, he's hard-working, he's enterprising, and he's scored so many goals this year, is Henrik Larsson, and he's not even Scots. But I admire him terrifically. He's just everything that a young Scot, a young footballer should be, and he epitomises so much that I believe in. Hard work, independence, creativity, and enterprising.
Well, that's great. You've just lost the Rangers vote, but that's okay. Right, let's take the audience. Who do you think would help the parties most, a non-political person? Yes, the gentleman with the red tie on. Who do you think could help the political parties?
Well, the Labour Party can keep Glenda Jackson, and the SNP can definitely keep our friend Sean Connery, who doesn't even live in Scotland and wants us to pay more tax. But it's well known the Tories' best known thespian is Ken Barlow, and now that he's back with Deirdre, we're going to walk this election.
Gentleman with the red tie on.
Of one of the early Bond girls, such as Ursula Andress, and she did to Sean Connery what I hope Labour will do to the SNP on the 6th of May.
Gentleman with the blue shirt, and then the gentleman too long. Yes.
Well, I wonder whether the Conservatives still need more help, and perhaps Jim Kerr and all the other simple minds.
The gentleman too long from you.
I think any band that's managed a sellout would be a good supporter for the Labour Party.
I mean, a man just up the back with the blue jacket on.
Yes, I think we Liberal Democrats would like to lay claim to Craig Brown because everybody else has.
Thank you very much. Wendy Alexander, whose endorsement would you like? You came rather unstuck with Robbie Coltrane when he claimed to support you, then jumped ship at the last minute.
Well, one of Donald's many virtues is he doesn't really like the Labour lovies school of politics.
So it was okay during the referendum when he was standing shoulder to shoulder with Sean Connery.
Yeah, but I think people look at celebrities and they add the glamour that the politicians fail to add to the campaigns. So I think Labour lovies are probably not for Scottish Labour this time.
So in fact, there's nobody that you'd actually want. Oh, well, there we are then.
Or not I'd be prepared to say on the television.
Well, Rosanna Cunningham, I think it's fine. We're just talking about bringing a bit of glamour to the campaign, and you, of course, have bagged Kirsty Hume. So what is it about the Nationalist in your manifesto that she thinks that she would like to support, given that I'm surprised she's got a vote?
The party of the future, and I think these people know that. I mean, I'm fascinated by Ross, though, who seems to think that they're attracted by the glitz of politics. I don't know what planet Ross, the Liberal Democrats, are on, but I'm a little puzzled as to how they could be attracted by our glitz. I'd rather think it's the other way around.
I can understand. So what was it that decided that you wanted to have Kirsty Hume on your side and you were going to publicise it? She doesn't have a vote in Scotland, does she?
I have to be honest about this. I really don't know Kirsty because I haven't spoken to the other Kirsty to ask her. I always think we've actually got the guy most political parties in Scotland wanted, and that was Sean. But so we don't really. And we don't really need another one. Thank you very much.
On that lovely moment, we'll leave it there. That's all for this evening. Join me at 10:45 next Thursday when I'll be in my hometown of Kilmarnock with Henry McLeish, John Swinney, David Steele, and Annabelle Goldie for another From Here to Holyrood debate. Good night from Perth.
Two-thirds of Scots feel more Scottish than British.
There is this groundswell that is coming from the streets.
A sentiment rooted in history, reinforced by culture.
I don't think any movie in the 1990s had more political impact than Braveheart had.
On May the 6th, that feeling is put to the vote.
All the political parties need to appeal to voters with a sense of Scottishness.
Panorama, the battle for Britain. Monday at 10:05, BBC One Scotland.
So there he is, trotting around with all these girls and all.
Don't sound too bad to me.
But it's driving Natalie wild.
Don't sound too bad.
Wild as in frustrated.
Oh.